So, folks, this is a tradition. This has been going on since the very first Christmas where I streamed on this channel. And that year I'd read this book, which is called Tomato Cain by Nigel Kneale. I read it to chat, and as you'll see, there's Minkies in it. And at the end of the story, even though it's quite horrifying, they said, well, we're Minkies now. And that's how it came to be. So yeah, it's called The Stocking. On the day before Christmas, the sun came through the window so low that it lit the highest broken patch on the wall. It was very cold when Ma came home, and she put an extra cover on his cot, the cover from their bed with the paper stuffing. A corner of paper stuck out with a picture of a lady on it. She gave him a piece of bread and fat while she made the tea. Ma, he said. Ma looked hard and said, yes. Will you hang up a stocking for me tonight? Ma laughed and said, all right. I got a big bag of sweets in it last year, he said. Daddy Christmas is kind, isn't he, Ma? Ma laughed again, and afterwards he heard her counting the money in her purse. Maybe Daddy Christmas will come and maybe he won't, she said. But all the same, Pa'll hang up a stocking for you. When Pa had finished his soup in the evening, he brought a chair and fastened an old one of Ma's long stockings to the wooden beam that ran across the room above the cot, a little below the ceiling. Pa leaned on the cot as he stepped down, and it creaked and swayed. That'll never do, said Pa, and he knocked 4 nails into the cot to hold it more firmly to the wall, as it had no legs. Plaster crumbled into his eyes as Pa hammered, and Pa leaned into the cot and rubbed away some of the grit with his sleeve. Ma said, turn over, silly creature. He pulled himself onto his face until the hammering was over. That'll keep it fast, said Pa, and his mouth twitched at Ma as he jerked his head at the places where the Minkies live. Ma nodded, and she said in the little voice he was not meant to hear, he doesn't mind the rats. Loudly she said, you don't mind the Mickey Mouses, love. You're too big to be afraid of them. He smiled at Ma, though the plaster was still hurting his eyes. She meant the Minkies. They lived high up, and they had fur on their bodies and long tails, and when the dark came and Ma and Pa went to bed, the Minkies ran about inside the ceiling. Sometimes they scratched on the floor below the cot, but when it was light they never came. There's plenty of room in that stocking, said Pa, and he laughed. Ma laughed too, and then she said to Pa, coming now? And Pa said, yes, the usual. Ma counted her money again and smiled. We can celebrate tonight. He'll have the house to himself, said Pa. Why, aren't there any other people now? He asked from the cot. Pa said, they thought there were too many Mickey Mouses. Oh, it'll be closing time before you come, Ma shouted. When they'd gone, everything was still, only the candle flickering softly. He looked up at the stocking hanging straight from the beam. It might have a bulge in it by the morning. He sang to himself in the cot, faintly, a little song that he turned out to be about the Minkies, their strange ways, their quietness, and their scuttling walk. He listened to the noise of ships on the distant river, and wondered why his legs would not move, although he was fine. He wondered about Christmas, and why it was not in the summer. He wondered about many things, and shivered and tried to screw himself up. There was a tiny sound in the ceiling, a faint scraping sound, as if somebody very small was shifting their feet. That would be a Minkie. There came another little sound, and another, and presently a soft slither, as if something had jumped up to the beam above. The Minkies were coming out. He looked up towards the dark ceiling and saw the green glimmer of 2 tiny eyes, and then 2 more, and then others. The ceiling was full of a rustling and scuttling, as it always was when the house became still. Minkies didn't like you to see them. A loose nail tumbled from above and clattered onto the floor. He saw that the whole wide beam was bulging on each side, and that the bulges were moving and changing. Often a long tail twitched and curled. Everywhere was a scratching, and the little squeaky sound of Minky's talk, like the talk of the yellow bird that died, only quicker and sharper. Suddenly it stopped. He looked upwards again, and the flickering eyes peeped down from the beam. He saw that the long Daddy Christmas stocking was moving, swaying from side to side and jerking. It seemed to have thickened in the place Pa had tied it to the beam. Then it had thickened lower down, and lower still. And there was a Minkie clinging to the stocking, and slowly dropping. Its eyes twinkled as it swung, and its head shot this way and that. He could smell the dark smell of the Minkie very close. When the furry body had reached the end of the stocking, it hung curled upside down, and its tail twisted here and there, feeling the folds in the stocking. He started with the quickness of the Minkie's jump, for all at once the stocking was empty, and the Minkie crouched on the foot of the cot, watching him. But when he looked back at the stocking, there were 3 more Minkies climbing down, swinging like the first one, yet there was no noise at all. The Minkies jumped onto the edge of the cot, one by one, and others took their place on the top of the stocking. They clambered down quickly, and many more bodies bobbed along the beam above. The first Minkie crouched and jumped into the cot. He could feel its weight gently pressing the bedclothes down, and at the same time there was a small cold feeling inside his head. But he was not afraid of furry Minkies. He held out his hand gently towards the first one. It did not move. Then suddenly there was a little sharp pain in his finger, and he pulled it back. The Minkie stared at him with black round eyes, like the end of Ma's hatpin. There was a tiny red bead on his finger that was salt when he tasted it. And everywhere was full of Minkies, and strange with the smell and warmth of them. All the whiskers and eyes and pointed faces moved together. They went now, 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 like the bumping of a heart inside his chest. There was a gentle weight on him. He looked down. The first Minkie sat on his chest, watching his eyes with its own. His hands were as heavy as his legs. He saw its mouth open, narrow and sharp and pale. It gave one shrill cry of Minkie talk, and instantly the whole room turned to hot leaping fur, squealing and tearing and chattering and biting. And that was that. That was the end of the story. And so, yeah, I read that story, and everyone in chat just went, well, we're Minkies. And I was like, are you sure? And they were like, yeah. So that's where the name The Minkies comes from.